So I am not one for role models, and apparently PowerPoints. I'm not typically one for role models, but Wendy Kopp actually has a real special place in my heart. For those of you who don't know who Wendy Kopp is, Wendy is the founder of Teach for America and also Teach for All. She has made extraordinary impact globally on education. Probably has built one of the most impressive pieces of nonprofit infrastructure that our world has seen in our lifetime. I would call her Wonder Wendy. I mean, if I were Wendy, I'd be pretty darn proud. I am a pretty ambitious person, and I would wager to say that in my lifetime, it'd be pretty hard to outdo Wendy Kopp. And yet, in 2010, it became in vogue to critique Teach for America. Actually became the norm. Unions sort of saw themselves as under attack. TFA was sort of seen as undoing the public education system, and its alumni base actually started to turn against it. So you have here one of the most impressive pieces of nonprofit infrastructure known to man. And on the other hand, you see its alumni base turning against it, saying, this is not the real change we want to see. This is not moving the needle in education. How do we make sense of this? This is what my talk is about today. The nonprofit sector, the paradoxes in it right now, and how there are certain forces right now, specifically driven by how it's financed and how it's funded, that actually make it so that despite even Herculean efforts, we're really stunted in our ability to meaningfully move the needle. Because actually, both were right in this scenario. Wendy made extraordinary impact in the world, but in local communities in our country, we didn't really see the needle move in meaningful ways on educational inequity. So let's look into what is going on. Right now, the nonprofit sector looks a little like this. We parachute money in from funders. A lot of that money is decided based on relationships. Funders actually have an enormous amount of power in terms of what gets funded and what change happens, but they actually have the most limited lens. They have some of the most limited understanding of the context of the communities in which we're working. And yet it's them who makes decisions about ultimately who gets funded and how that works. And when they do fund, they're funding specific entities. And they fund those entities based on metrics that they request. I do 10,000 hours of training. I put 10,000 kids in my summer camp programs. They're looking for sexy metrics that say, you deserve funding. I think that sounds great. Let's fund that. You seem like a good person. Let me fund them. The problem with this structure and this financial structure around the nonprofit sector is it creates these widgets. Lots of them. Delaware is 900. 900. You'd be thinking you're living in a utopia with 900 financed nonprofits. But the trick is that when you fund like this and you target charities with as very specific widgets with their own metrics, what ends up happening is all of these nonprofits actually start to operate in silos. We love the word, we know this is true, we all agree on this. We all agree that this is what's holding us back from making groundbreaking change in communities, is this. And I'll give you an example, going back to the Teach for America, an education landscape. TFA came into Delaware, as you know, I know this well, in 2011. And we started placing teachers. And actually, the Teach for America in Delaware is extraordinary. Not a lot of people know this, but it's like one of the highest rated in the country. They have like 6 Teachers of the Year It spun out multiple nonprofits like Light and SummerCollab. It brought Relay here, which is doing great work in terms of master's in education work in urban schools. Great, enormous, outsized Herculean performances. Wonder Wendy all over the place. But we were still seeing segmented and fragmented actions. And if any of us, if any one of the nonprofits who are in this space right now in education were to claim victory, were to say that educational equity, that we have moved the needle, we would be wrong. Because we're looking at single-digit literacy rates in one of the most expensive school systems in the country. 5 out of 15 of the leading education nonprofits actually work out of the same building in a co-working space. Relay, TFA, Light, SummerCollab. We don't talk to each other. We've had 6 hours of collaborative planning together in the last 2 years. We work in the same building in a co-working space. 10 of the 15 are within a 10-minute walk from us. We do not prioritize collaborative planning. We're all supposed to be in this together. We are all funded to try to move the needle on educational inequity. And yet, we look like this and function like this when we need to function like this. This is a gear. Now, if we were to function like a gear, we would pace ourselves with each other. We would contour ourselves to make linkages. We would understand that we were moving in the same direction. And we would understand the metrics that governed all of us, not just one of us. And I ask you, look at this. This question, who deserves more funding? What a ridiculous question when you look at a gear. Who deserves to be funded in this gear? Well, it seems like everyone. Thank you. It seems like we all would need to be funded in this gear, maybe in different ways, maybe differently calibrated. But that's the science, right? Understanding how the widgets fit together. This is where the nonprofit sector needs to go, and it needs to go there urgently. We are wasting so much money, and we are wasting so much time by not figuring out how to function more like this. But it's possible. Today, our structure, as I mentioned before, starts with funders. They set the agenda about what it is that they want to fund. We as providers or practitioners apply for funding. And often, we then, based on the funds that we get, make decisions for the community. We make decisions about who gets what, with actually very little input often from the community itself. It tends to be the case often that folks say, oh, it's just so hard to engage the community in this landscape. The real trick and sad aspect of this equation is that providers can say, we could have done more, but there's no accountability in this model, because funders ultimately aren't accountable for moving the needle in communities. Who is in this model? No one. And that's precisely where we are, or why we are where we are today. We need to flip the equation. We need to flip the equation so that the community starts to identify the priorities, that providers start to learn and iterate and grow real breakthrough solutions together, and that funders actually stand up and step up to fund the true equation, to fund the true costs of what that gear requires to meaningfully move the needle in communities. Right now, we don't know whether social change of moving a needle on something costs $5 million, $50 million, or $500 million. How insane is that? That all of us are going to work, doing really great work, and challenging ourselves to move the needle in communities, and we don't know whether moving the needle costs $50 million or $500 million. Change. This has to change. Because if we don't understand that, then we don't understand the problem set we're working in. So my big idea is that funders have a huge opportunity to show up to. They have an opportunity to flip their mindset and how they operate in the space. They have an opportunity to start looking not at charity targets, not at nonprofits as individuals, but as ecosystems. We need to look at nonprofits as ecosystems that need to be studied and understood and tested so that we can learn the breakthrough solutions that are required to meaningfully move the needle. Funders need to then stand up and feel accountable for funding the true cost of that social change. That's the new equation that I want to stand behind. Thank you.